Can you turn the page, learn from the mistakes, and then wake up the next day and be like, okay, I'm gonna go kick your ass. And if I don't, I'm not gonna get hung up on it. I'm just gonna come back tomorrow and try to kick your ass again.
So last time I saw you, you left with like 20 books.
Yep.
Have you read them all yet?
Oh no, I'm a slow reader. I'm in the middle of Game of Tennis right now.
What do you think?
I love it.
Yeah?
Because it's so true, and like dissecting my game and some of the thoughts I've had this offseason about slowing down everything, especially self-talk.
Yeah.
Trying to be positive and not self-constructive, especially like pitch to pitch when I'm hitting, because it's like you're doing something that's really hard.
Yes.
And the pitcher can throw 87 different pitches at different velocities. And when you swing and miss, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
But it's so easy to get so frustrated with that.
Well, some people think that's the hardest thing in sports. That hitting a baseball is the hardest act, like single act in any of sports. Like in golf, I mean, obviously the different shots are hard, but the ball is sitting there. You know, in basketball, hitting a 3-point shot is hard. Under pressure, it's hard. But like, it's not, you're not like defying physics, you know, like there, yeah. I think it's like 400 milliseconds or something from like the release of a ball to when you have, like it's not actually possible to do that consciously. You have at some, yeah, it's, yeah. No, it's, yeah, at some level you are acting on pure instinct and training. You're not like, this is a really good pitch. Right. I'm going to do this swing here, because you don't, literally, you can't do that. You don't have time.
It's kind of like the zone. I think I'm in chapter like 5, but it's like the zone you get into where it's like that balance.
Yeah.
But like you're able to just go and focus on the external, which is the ball.
Yes.
Right? But as soon as you think, oh, my back elbow needs to do this, or I need to do this with my front leg, it's like you lose. Literally.
You don't have time.
Don't have time.
Yeah. And you're, by thinking of that, you're actually it's like you're taking power away from the wheels that are supposed to be gripping, you know?
Yeah.
So that must be strange. I mean, when you see the pitcher start to go into a windup, like what are you thinking?
I mean, I try to have like little phrases for myself when I step into the box.
Yeah.
And then when he moves, I try to turn it off.
Yeah.
I try to. Sometimes it's hard.
Does the pitch clock make it easier?
Oh, it's worse.
It's worse. Yeah. I guess I would have guessed that it would make it easier because there's less time to think, and you can't step out and make it. You can't just. It puts a. This is it.
Yeah.
You got to do it in here.
Yeah. For me, I really focus on breathing, and the more time I have, the more I can control my breath.
Right.
And kind of tune it out. Where the pitch clocker, I call it the shot clock.
Yeah.
It's just inconsistent where you play. And so like you'll look up and you have to be in the box with your eyes on the pitcher at 9 seconds, and you'll look up and it's like 11 and you're like, oh gosh, get in, hurry.
Yeah.
But I mean,
so your whole playing career up until, I mean, when did the clock start and when did you start? Like
that would have been in 22 in the minor leagues.
Okay.
And then in 23 in the big leagues.
Right.
So my whole life it was you
had unlimited time, and then suddenly you don't have unlimited time.
Right. And they just jumped in, and I don't know how they came up with 15 and 19 seconds for us, and now I think it's 15, 18. No idea how they came up with those numbers, but.
Well, they probably just said, hey, if we do this, it'll make the game this long, and if we do
Probably.
it this, it'll make the game on average this long, and they're just trying to fit the thing into a tighter window.
Yeah. I mean, I understand why they did it, right?
Yeah.
Like the attention span's not
sure
as long as it used to be. And the shorter the game, like, I don't know if booze sales are going to go down that much because it's a 30 to 40 minute difference. Like, I don't think.
But it's also, it's like clear, like if you're saying that stepping out and having unlimited time makes you better at what you do, well, of course, every person is going to take the maximum amount of time to do the thing. And so everyone is pursuing their individual optimization that's coming at the expense of the
fan
overall optimization of the experience. Yeah. But like, I just wondered if it's like, no, because sometimes there's some things where it's like, look, like you got 10 seconds to choose. You'll just choose. Yeah. You know, I do that with my kids sometimes. I'm like, look, we can walk through this gift shop for 2 minutes. You pick something, you can have it, but we're not doing this 45-minute thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, definitely.
And they're actually happier because they didn't torture themselves for 45 minutes, like weighing every option 500 times.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that does make sense. Especially when you're going well, you're like, oh, get me back in the box.
Oh,
when you're going bad, that's when you're like, okay, timeout, because you get one timeout. And like for me, I like to pick up the dirt and throw it. That's kind of like my physical release.
You touch it?
Yeah, I like pick up some dirt and throw it. It's like my physical release to where it's like, okay, it's out of my head.
How did you get that habit?
Trials, tribulations. I work with a guy named Brian Kane. He's my middle performance coach, and I've done all kind of things. But with the pitch clock, I've had to learn and adjust and adapt. And I actually saw Aaron Judge do it when we played against him, I think in 22, before he broke the AL record.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I like that. That's cool.
He does that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
He'll like pick up dirt when he's struggling or like two in his head and throw it. And I was like, ooh, I kind of like that. And that was just something.
Someone sent me this thing once. It's something these monks use. It's like an incense. It's like a little like a little bottle, and you put this powder in your hand and you go like this, and then it's kind of like the LeBron James thing that he does with the thing. But you're just sniffing this kind of incense powder, and it's kind of like a ritual of sort of like clean, like a scent, and then it's gone. And then you do whatever you're supposed to do. Like I think they would do it like before prayers or something. But there's something about those kind of little rituals that sort of start a process or end a process that can be kind of mentally clarifying.
Yeah. So it's just, for me, it's just been identifying what those are going to be and sticking to them.
But you have less time.
Yeah. So I can only do that once at bat, maybe.
Yeah.
Because I try to call timeout. Because you only get one timeout.
Per at bat?
Per at bat.
Okay. Yeah. But it's like, there's a fine line between ritual and OCD, right?
Definitely.
And so I do imagine if you're like, well, this one works, let me add another one. All of a sudden you're like, you got 30 rituals that you do before you go do the thing. And then the thing that was designed to get you out of your head is now making you very, very in your own head.
Right. You're like, if I don't do this, I'm not going to perform.
Yes.
And it's like, no.
Yeah.
And that's where, I wonder if it was you talking about it. It's like we can't go into a game based on feelings. You can't do anything based on feelings because no matter what you do that day, you could feel great and you could feel terrible.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you got to go do what you do.
Yes.
And just because you feel great does not mean positive success. And just because you feel terrible doesn't mean terrible success. Some of the best games I've ever played, it was like my worst batting practice or worst pregame routines. And it's like, somehow that turns my brain off and it's like, well, no expectations today, and then you just go succeed.
Well, and also though, like the rituals can become it can make you very fragile, or the totems or whatever. You're like, I wear this necklace, I wear like I have these rings that I wear. I have this ring that it's like from ancient Rome, so it's like 2,000 years old. It was like a ring that a person wore, and it's got like a little sort of Roman insignia on it. And I usually wear it when I do a talk. And like I did a talk here on Wednesday or something in Austin. And it's usually, I keep it in like my medicine bag because I do all my talks on the road. And so it was here, like since it was here, I didn't have my medicine bag, right? Because it's like in my suitcase. And it wasn't until I was like driving to the place that I was like, oh shit, I don't have like the thing that's part, because I'll spin it or whatever. And I was like, I tried to say to myself, this is actually good because now you're going to, obviously the ring doesn't do anything. It's a silly superstition. And by not doing it and getting practice not doing it, that's a resilience that I need anyway, because the more you get in your head, like, hey, I need to wear these lucky socks, or if I don't like, touch the dirt or, tap home plate 3 times, I won't be able to do what I do. Right. And so the thing that was supposed to get you more in a good headspace actually becomes this kind of fragility where if you don't do it, you're a mess.
Right. Like through college was known for like, I would stare at a focal point on my bat and I would repeat the same phrase to myself. With the pitch clock, I can't do that. But I've tried to develop to where like I still have like 2 or 3 things I tell myself. But when you look up and the pitch clock's at 9 or whatever, and you got to jump in, and you don't do that, that's where I'm still trying to learn. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
And that's where the journey this offseason has been kind of revitalizing for me, is because it's like, it doesn't really matter.
No.
At all. But you have to separate from that and not give it weight. And that's where the inner game of tennis, like, don't be judgmental about events or whatever. It's like, who cares?
Well, yeah, and the thing I took from that book is that, and I think about it. Actually, I was just in here with Matthew McConaughey. We were talking about self-consciousness is the enemy. Anytime you are thinking about what you are doing, you are spending less time doing the thing. Like anytime you're thinking about, hey, if I'm not standing how I normally stand, that's a problem. Anytime you're thinking like, hey, if I whiff this pitch, people are going to laugh at me. Or if I don't get this in time, these people are going to be mad at me, or they're going to be surprised. But anytime you're thinking about what other people are going to be thinking about what you're doing, that's a problem too. You want to be in it as much as possible, thinking as little as possible, just as connected and present as you can be. That's like a funny thing, like even doing these. You make notes, but the more you're looking at the notes, probably the worse it's going. And like, I think there's an Eisenhower line where he says like, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. You want to have trained it a million times. You want to know all the mechanics, and then you want to immediately like throw it all out and just be doing the thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the journey for me right now too, is like learning to separate.
Yeah.
Separate. And I've always been one of those guys that's like, the ego of me was like, I'm going to be the first one to the field.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the last one to leave.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's actually a detriment, because I'm in the thing
Yes.
way too long.
Yeah.
And there's no separation between Josh and the baseball player. It's like, he's always the baseball player.
Well, and if you're like, hey, I work out a lot, or I am doing this thing until it needs to be done, that's a good place. If you're like, no, I have to wait for this guy to leave so then I can leave after him. Now, like, form is leading function rather than the other way around. Like, you're acting the part rather than like doing the part. You're trying to be seen as the thing. Like I've said this before, I bet like coaches are notorious for like working these insane hours. I bet if there was like a union negotiation and coaches like in college sports, like you only have this many workouts, whatever.
Yeah.
If coaches were enforced rules like that, no fan would notice in a deterioration
at all.
It's just a persona of the coach who's whatever. Their families would notice because they'd actually be around, but I don't think they would suddenly like not be coaching as well. It's mostly an illusion.
Yeah, because I just like reflecting on the past season, I was injured a bunch, so I missed a lot of time. But for a 7:00 game at home, I'd get to the field at 11:30.
Yeah,
I'd do my hitting routine at like 1:30. It's like, bro, you still got 6.5 hours.
You've been on for hours.
On the whole day.
Yeah, which and I do think the younger you are, you just have enough energy to just do that. But as you get older and you get more and more concentrated and potent in what you do, I do think you get in a place of sort of like conservation of energy. Like this talk I did on Wednesday, actually. It was funny, like they were like, get here at this time to go on. And usually, and this is like one of the few areas I'm deliberately not punctual. Like I'm a pretty punctual person. But they're always like, get here at 3:30 because you're going on at 4:30 or whatever. And then you actually go on at 4:45. And then you have to kind of sit around and like entertain these people backstage. It's not like the trajectory I want to be on, like emotionally and energy wise. So I have to like consciously like be late, even though I want to be on time, just so but anyways, like this was an unusual one. There was like a band playing, and then there was like an award ceremony. It was all this stuff beforehand. And I was just, and then like I let them put the mic on too early, and then I had to go to the bathroom again. It was just like I could just feel that like the clock had started, but my performance was you want like the clock starting and your performance to be relatively aligned.
Right.
But I can imagine with your like anxiety and your desire to like be seen as the good athlete.
Right.
What you're doing is hitting start on the clock like 8 hours before you go in front of the crowd and do the thing. And that's a lot to ask of your mental acuity, to say nothing of your physical acuity.
Right. Was that Churchill that said conservation of energy?
Yeah, his quote was, never stand when you can sit, never sit when you can lay down.
Yeah. I actually just read that this morning when I was kind of preparing a little bit for this. But yeah, it's like if I get to the field 3 hours later, it's not like I'm going to be less intentional or have less time to get my stuff in. But when I am there that early, it does create that sense of like, okay, what are you here for? Are you here for people to see you do your routine early? Are you here for people to see you watching film for an hour? Like, are you actually getting better? Or are you just wasting time and creating more anxiety within yourself? Now the game starts and you're like, oh gosh, I'm kind of tired because I've been on all day.
Well, and this is knowing whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Like the best definition I heard of this is like an introvert loses energy around people, and extrovert gains energy around people. So if you're someone who finds social situations more draining than not, if you have to go do an extroverted thing, which is like a performance, athletic or otherwise, then knowing like, hey, I gotta protect this thing, so I'm spending the energy where I'm paid to spend the energy, not on the other shit.
Right. It's like you and McConaughey were talking about it, I think in his actor sense, like being unimpressive, or like writing. He was talking about his writing being unimpressive. It's like, how do I show up on a daily basis and try to be unimpressive to those around me? Because for so long, it's been ingrained in my head that like you have to do X, Y, and Z so people can see it, and that's what's going to make you a good player.
Yeah, some football player told me once that he loves the videos that players start posting in the off season of their impressive workouts. Beach workouts or whatever. And he's like, those are the guys I'm not worried about, because the rest of us have been working out all season.
Right.
If you're like just suddenly all off season, you're just suddenly posting you running with a parachute at the beach or whatever. That's like performative training and not actual training. But yeah, like how are you doing the thing as opposed to looking like you're doing the thing? And then I think some of us, it's like, we hear, oh, so-and-so did this, so like I'll just make that my thing. And maybe that's not. And
it's not who you are.
Yeah.
So it's, what did he say? Be uniquely yourself? Mm-hmm. Is that what McConaughey said?
Yeah.
So it's like first off, define who you want to be, right? Like if my career, like we talked about last time we talked, Memento Mori, like if my career ended, how do I want to be defined?
Yeah.
Okay, now just live that way every day.
Yeah.
Don't worry about all the other nonsense. Like just live that like today. Can't worry about yesterday. Can't worry about tomorrow. Just do it today. And then as you stack those days, like you'll eventually be exactly what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are certain things that play better and look better. Like, being the first one there, the last one to leave. But if that's not actually what is, asking yourself, is this moving the needle for me? Is this actually making a positive difference? Or is it affect? And then having the discipline to shut down some of that discipline is like a weird kind of paradoxical thing. But you have to go like, no, I'm gonna stay home and do this, or this. I'm gonna rest, or I'm gonna recover. I'm not just gonna subject myself to sort of these other obligations, so I can do the thing that there's kind of an arrogance too, almost in thinking like, oh, I have an unlimited amount of resources to draw on here, because you don't. You have a finite amount.
Yeah.
And ideally you want to spend it where it makes the most difference.
Yeah, and that's where you don't need to be there. To myself, you don't need to be there 12 hours today. Like you really don't. You got to perform at 7:00. So whatever you need to do beforehand, starting at 11:30, like I find myself just wasting so much time, and that's like the build up. And so once you get to the game, you've worked it up so much that it's like kind of life and death. When it's like, even if I go 0 for 4 with 4Ks tonight, like I have tomorrow, it's okay. But like we talked about, I always thought it was like my edge to be there for so long. But it's really like, looking back on it, it becomes a detriment. Does it work sometimes? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But more than not, baseball is a game of failure. It's not going to work. So it's like, why do you continuously do something, especially reflecting on it, why do you continuously do something when you can find a new hobby that just like potentially clears your mind throughout
Yeah.
the morning, and
Right.
then when you get to the field, it's like, okay, now I flip the switch. It's not
You
wake
could have
up
been
and flip
playing
it.
pool at your house or
Anything.
reading or doing anything. Yeah, I remember I listened to this one radio host once when I was a kid, and he did a 2 hour radio show like 4 days a week, and he was like, they asked me to get here like 30 minutes before the show each day, and he's like, I told him if I have to get here 30 minutes before the show every day, that's like doing an extra hour of the show 1 day a week. That, he's like, I'll get here 5 minutes before the show starts, and like, it's funny because you're arguing over such a small amount of time, but it's like, if what you do is hard and requires all of you, knowing what that is, and then kind of, I think the larger lesson, if you're not in sports, like, what is the main thing that you're paid to do, and then basically everything else is superfluous. And if it helps you do that thing better, you should do it. And if it doesn't, you have to have the discipline to kind of say no to that, because you got to protect the thing.
Right.
Because it's really hard.
Yeah, and that's where I know it's going to be a challenge for me, because once spring, like, it's great to think about this right now, but as soon as spring training starts, it's like, am I getting up at 5:30 to get there at 6? Like, what am I going to be doing? But that is where the discipline's going to have to come in, and that's where we were talking about the coffee shop. That's become something that I love to do because it gets me out of the house and it gets me into this headspace where it's like, okay, I can just tune the world out and just kind of throw myself into reading or writing or something. And that 30 minutes, that hour that I spend there, it's like, that was so beautiful. And it was for me. It wasn't for anything else.
The problem for me is it's like, when I'm with my family, like, I still mentally have to leave, right? So like I have to. It's like, I know, hey, if I get there at the time they say I'm supposed to get here, or if I just even get there when I want to get there, it won't lead to like sort of peak performance. But I can't just be regular here, so I have to like leave. I have to find some transition process that allows me to kill time, but just not in the green room of the thing or whatever. Yeah, it's weird how getting into the zone is, everyone has a weird way of doing it. There's no normal ways to get into the zone. You kind of like ease yourself into it. It's like a thing you're kind of slipping into, like a cold pool or something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you see it in a locker room. There's, 10 guys going to start that night, and all 10 of them have a different way to be ready to perform at 7:00.
Yeah.
There's
They're all
no
about
guy
to go do the same thing.
Literally.
At the same time.
Yep.
But they have to work their way into it differently.
They all prepare differently. And that's what is so unique about a locker room, and I'm sure it's unique in all sports, is how guys do it.
Yeah.
And once failure sets in, because that's inevitable,
Sure.
how do they change, or are they the same?
Yeah.
And that's where you'll see the veterans, like some of the vets we have, they're very steady.
Yeah.
And that leads to, more steady performance. But guys like me that are younger, we start failing and we're like, oh, got to change this. That, I guess, the changing of the routine kind of can throw off performance too. Like we were talking about with, if I don't do X, Y, and Z, I'm not going to perform.
Yeah.
It's like releasing those thoughts is something that, I mean, I've been working on forever, but it's never been more clear to me than right now that, like, that stuff just doesn't matter. Feelings don't matter. Just go play the game.
Yeah.
And with reading the book, it's like, don't give any weight to what you're doing. Like, I go into the cage to do my routine. It's not like every day I have to hit 50 balls exactly like this. It's like, no, just go in there and find the flow, and then you're good to go, regardless of what the result was.
Right.
And then go play. Same with dealing with failure in the game, because it's going to happen. It's really hard. But fouling a pitch off that you should hit, or striking out 3 or 4 times, like, it doesn't matter.
What's funny, there's a line from Epictetus where he's saying that, we don't know exactly what game he's referring to, but he says that, like, a great philosopher is like a great ball player, in that they don't label throws good or bad. They just catch it or throw it, Yeah. And that sort of tendency to want to put things in categories or to have an opinion about it, to me, that's the distinction between, like, being in or out of the zone or the moment. when you're in it, you're just like, oh, I'm running to get this ball, and then I'm throwing it back, and then what are they going to do? That's the back and forth of it. But when you're like, oh, I'm sucking today, or oh, they're sucking today, or oh, like in golf, the second you go like, I'm really playing well today, that's like death.
It's over.
When I'm writing, all's good. When I'm like, is this a productive day, unproductive day? This is gold. Am I going to use this? None of that. First off, that just takes mental energy. And so every thought that you have towards that is just not more words that you're writing. But it also means you're not fully immersed in the thing. You have 1 foot in and 1 foot out.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's what taken from the end of game of tennis so far. It was talking about like the tennis player kept missing their backhand, and they're like telling themselves, your backhand sucks today or whatever. And it's like that takes you out. Like you're out of the performance.
Yeah.
But if you just play, you don't even think about it. You're probably hitting shots, and you're not like, ooh, I'm going to hit this down the line. It's like you just do it.
I have a super, like, because I run, and like when I can like feel something in my shoe, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get a blister, like, and then I feel like I'm willing it into existence by thinking about it. But if I wasn't thinking about it, it's probably not true. It would probably happen either way. But there's some part of me where I think that by focusing on it, I know it's going to be a problem, and if I could forget that that's happening, it would be fine. It's like last night I was like reading some article about like flu cases or whatever, and I was like, the next thing I know, I'm like, I feel, just like, because I thought about the thing, now you have an awareness. It's like when you feel a bug crawling on you, then you feel them everywhere.
Right.
You want to be just, how quick you can get at forgetting things is like a magical part of performance.
And that's what's so crazy about hitting in general. Yeah. You'll have somebody watching you, right? Let's say they're struggling, you're performing well.
Yeah.
They'll come up to you and go, hey, what are you doing with your front shoulder there?
Yeah.
Next thing you know, that's all you can think about, and you have no idea what that thing's doing. But now you have this awareness, and it's taking you out of the game. And in the book too, it was like, if the other person's playing really well, walk by them and ask them, like, what's working on your backhand today? Yeah. And then they'll tell you like, ooh, I'm hitting it out front. Next thing you know, they're like overconscious, and they're like, oh gosh, now they can't hit it.
Yeah.
But it's like drawing awareness to something that you necessarily don't think about. It doesn't matter. But now you have that awareness, and you're like, oh no, here we go.
What does it feel like to connect with a pitch?
When everything goes perfect, you kind of don't even feel it. Truly. Like when it's perfect right on the barrel, it just kind of goes. But that's kind of like the flow of it all. There's definitely days where you try to manhandle it, and that's where you end up breaking your bat. You end up...
When you try to hit it really hard?
Yeah, when you're trying to do way too much with it. Especially me, for years, like, exit velocity is like a big stat. So I've always, like, chased, like, hitting the ball harder. But...
Is that something you can consciously influence?
No, not at all. And honestly, you can't really change it. It's kind of something like, you either have it or you don't.
Right.
And, yeah, I've chased it forever. And so you start trying to swing harder, or you start trying to manipulate ball flight, meaning, like, I'm going to pull this ball in the air to left field. You can control that to some extent, but for the most part, if the pitch isn't perfect, you're not going to be able to do what you're trying to do. So for me, coming out of college, I did need to make some swing adjustments. So like having a little mental awareness was good. But now I've created an over-awareness to that. I've like overdone it to where I have to go back and get back to the fundamentals that got me here in the first place, because I've been trying to do something so much and trying so hard to do. And now I just lost complete thought of the question. But
the image I have in my mind that I'm like going for when I'm writing or working on a thing is, for some reason, and I haven't played baseball since I was like 10, is like a batter connecting with the ball, and that like crack and that sound and that just sort of like, I don't know why it is, but that's the image I have in my mind, and that's what I sort of think about. And it's not what I'm aiming for, because it's not really something you're aiming for, but that's kind of this, I don't think about like, how do I make something that really does well, or like, that really helps people or whatever. I just think like all I'm trying to do is connect with the ball.
That's it.
And that I like that sound. That's just kind of the mental image I have for like what a successful day is that connection.
Yeah.
So I've always wondered what it actually feels like. I mean, I've been at batting cages and stuff. I know what it feels like, but at some level, doing it in a major league ballpark against someone who's throwing a pitch at you that, again, at a physics level, you shouldn't be able to hit. Like someone is trying as hard as they can at a peak level of human performance to not make it possible for you to do what you are trying to do, and then you have done it. I think that's like the magic that I'm imagining.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you hit a homer or something.
Yeah.
And everyone talks about how like they black out. For me, when stuff like that happens, it's almost like there's a split second where I don't hear anything and everything really slows down. And I'm assuming that's the zone that everybody talks about. Yeah. It's just like it's a split second thing. It's not like this thing that lasts for a very long time.
Yeah.
But I know when that happens, I'm like, oh, that was perfect.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to do it all the time. I don't know if anyone really does.
I mean, the best who ever did it could only do it like 40% of the time
right.
for one season.
Right.
Yeah.
Ted Williams 407.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do you find that? And is the mental clarity really diving into self to the doer? Does that create it more often? And it's not necessarily going to produce more results, right? Like I could still hit the best ball ever and they could catch it.
Yeah.
And they could do whatever. But
I think that's part of why I like the metaphor, which is like all you can do is get under the ball and hit it as far and as hard as you're able to do. And then you can run, which you're supposed to do, but no other part of the process is in your control.
Right.
Like what they're doing and how they're going to respond to it is no longer up to you. And so there's something just about like, okay, so the purity is you got to connect. And then sometimes it's going over the back wall. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's going to shock you how short it ends up. Sometimes it veers right over and into foul. Sometimes they pull it off the back wall or like they steal one from you. You know, sometimes you get thrown out at second because you get greedy or whatever. You know, like there's all the different things that could happen, but like the purity of the moment that you're trying to go for as a creator, or I guess maybe as an athlete, is just the last part of it that's up to you.
Right. And as you were talking there, it was like something we talked about a minute ago, like the preparation. I could prepare all day for this pitcher and how I believe he's going to attack me. But as soon as I step in that box, I have to throw it out the window because they're 99% of the time, they're not going to attack me that way.
Yeah.
Like I could, every once in a while you'll get a gut feeling. You're like, oh, he's going to throw this pitch.
Yeah.
But the odds of you being correct is, I want to say 0. Like,
right.
And if
statistically, you're not going to be able to guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And be successful.
Yeah.
Like you're going to guess every once in a while and get it right. But to be consistently successful, you have to throw that out the window. So it's like, that's a whole nother thing. It's like prepare, but like we talked about, throw it out.
Well, and I think maybe I'm attracted to the elusiveness of it, right? Like a great hitter, like hitting 200 is pretty decent, right? So somewhere between 20 and 40%, that's like the band that like the best who do it are even hoping for. And understanding that, okay, so most of what I make, most of what I write, most of what I record isn't going to connect at all. Like I'm just going to whiff, and then a couple of times you're going to connect, but it's going to be, like you're going to get your singles, then your doubles, and then sometimes you connect exactly when all the other factors line up. And that's where you get those like amazing results. But that's elusive, even with the elusive parts.
Yeah. And now there's so many statistics. You literally feel like a walking statistic. There's so many dang statistics in baseball. But like we talked about earlier, it's like you can do everything right. Literally every single thing right.
Yeah.
And they catch it.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, how do I view that?
Yeah.
Do I get frustrated? And do I say, oh, it's a negative moment? It's like, you literally did everything right.
Yeah.
But you got out. And then you could do legitimately everything wrong. I remember I had a pinch hit at bat, wasn't ready for it, wasn't prepared. I go up there. I don't even think I had my wrist tape on. Like, I was just like completely out of it. And I end up getting a hit.
By being out of it, is that you were actually in it because you didn't get to do your stuff?
Right.
Yeah.
But then I did, like, my swing was terrible. I was swinging at pitches that I had no business swinging at. And the result ended up being good for the club.
Yeah.
And it was like, what just happened? I literally did everything wrong, and I hit a single, and the guy scored.
Right.
And then all the days I prepare to be ready, you struggle. And it's like, golly, this game sucks sometimes. But that's where I'm trying to learn and develop routines, especially early in the day, to go to the coffee shop, to go read, to do something for myself.
Yeah.
Because the amount of intentionality I'm going to have isn't going to change.
Right.
But I can delay flipping that switch an hour longer, 2 hours longer, and now I'm not wasting time sitting in my locker, sitting in the film room, twiddling my thumbs, scrolling social media or whatever. It's like I'm actually intentional with that little time, and then switch.
What's weird to me about baseball, unlike the other sports that I've sort of gotten to go behind the scenes on, it's one of the only ones where you practice where you perform. Mm-hmm. Almost all the other sports, the facility is in like the boonies somewhere, and then the arena is where you go to work. Yeah. So it must be a little weird. I could actually see on some level getting there earlier and work, because you're like, this is my home also.
Right.
Like here, this place, this is where I write every day. So like I'm very comfortable here, and I can feel like when I'm stressed, or if I feel like I'm behind, or I feel like I got something, I'm like, I'm gonna go just do I'm gonna go into the rhythm, which is different than, if like when I have to go perform. That's an unfamiliar place, or that's the showtime place.
Right.
But yeah, baseball, like they just have the one place, and it's not super nice usually. Like it's like these, because you're in the bowels of a stadium as opposed to a practice facility, so it's usually like this like sort of cinder block like bunker thing, as opposed to like when you go to I remember when I spoke to the Seahawks, you're like, oh, like the guy who owned Microsoft built this, and he not only does it have like the best tech, but he was like, well, what is like a great office feel like?
Right.
I'm gonna make this is their office. I'm gonna make them their thing.
Yeah.
I've never felt that in a baseball stadium.
No, baseball, and our stadium is unbelievable. It's
it's
almost like
one
a
of the
cathedral.
newer ones, right?
Yeah. It was open in 2020, but it's beautiful. But yeah, the game's at 7. We practice at 3:00.
Yeah.
And that's our like practice. So we don't actually really practice. It's like a gear up for the game.
Yeah.
Early batting practice, ground balls, whatever. But you don't actually like ever practice, to where like football you have all week to prepare. Basketball you have like a day in between to go shoot around at the stadium you're gonna play at. For us, it's like, show up and play today.
Yeah.
But that's where developing those routines is so vital, because you don't need to go out and take BP every day.
Yeah.
Maybe once, twice a week, maybe. Like if you feel off and you just need to get the backdrop of the stadium, go do it. But it's not something you need to divulge in every day. But kind of what you were talking about, being comfortable, I was like, yeah, that's where I was comfortable.
Yeah.
So I literally wake up, and as soon as I woke up, I'm in the car going to the field.
Right.
But at the same time, that did create some anxiety of leading up to the performance. Now I was injured too, so I was doing a bunch, trying to get in to do my rehab before all the other guys got in, trying to be time conscious, especially when I started playing again, because I had to do XYZ of things to try to be ready to play. But yeah, it's like, get comfortable in these other routines for me, and then flip the switch on 2 hours later, because it's not that big of a deal. 11:30 to 1:30 is not a big deal to get there and be prepared. But I've done something for myself. I've kind of released the thoughts. And one thing I took away from the New Year, New You challenge was, before bed every night, writing down all the stuff that like frustrated me or made me mad, or just thoughts I can't get rid of, and burning them.
Yeah.
Like that physical release has been
interesting,
amazing for me.
Yeah. How do you wipe this slate clean? Because you think about what you're accumulating in the course of a day, and then you think about what you're accumulating in the course of a week, in the course of a year. It starts to be a lot you're carrying. Yeah. Just like shit you're aware. It's like, you're younger than me, but like there used to be this thing you would do on a computer called a defrag. And it was like this thing you would run, and it would just like I don't know exactly how it worked, but the point is, your computer would just start to be slow after a while, and you would run this program, and it would like combine things or get rid of things that it would like partially delete it. It would overwrite stuff, and then suddenly your computer would be working better. And then what I took from that is like, oh, there's just shit running in the background, or there's things that I've accumulated, I'm wearing. It'd be like if you never took today's clothes off, you just put on new clothes every day. Suddenly, like very soon, you'd have like this much clothes on.
Right.
And so, how do you kind of start fresh and get rid of stuff? And the faster you can do that, the better. And then probably even like in the course of a game, like what is it, a good game, you might get up there 4 times?
4 to 5 times max.
So, but by the 5th time, you have 4 other ones in your head just from that day, let alone, you've played 5 games in a row. That's a lot to be
It's definitely
carrying.
a lot. And that's what they say in baseball, is being able to turn the page quick.
Yeah.
But for me, I was always somebody that suppressed all of it and just like, oh, I'll deal with it later.
It's still there.
Later never comes. You're
Yeah.
500 at bats into the season, and you're like, oh gosh, I've never dealt with this. But that's where that was very eye-opening to me, because I was like, oh, release it. And, I pray about it too, and I go through it, and I release it. But it's like, oh, this is actually really good to actually like deal with it and let it go. And now I'm going to bed with a clean conscience. I'm not going to bed and your mind starts racing and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have swung at that pitch, or I wish I would have swung at that pitch.
Yeah.
It's like, no, like it's done. It's over. You can't change it, for one. 2, tomorrow's a new day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, you're getting a fresh at bat. I mean, the pitch count turns over. So
Yeah.
like, why are you acting as if you're not 0-0?
Right. And that's where if you don't clear it, or even at bat, if you don't try and forget it and you get hung up on it, now you're thinking, oh, what last time he did XYZ to me, he might do that again. Next thing you know, he doesn't do that, and you're all discombobulated. Or you're still like, ooh, my hands need to do this time. And
Yes.
again, you start thinking internally, you lose.
Yeah.
Like it's just, and obviously everybody can do different things. Like there could be somebody that can think about internal whatever and be
But some people
successful.
are just so naturally gifted and amazing that they don't have any of these problems. And
Right.
most of us are not those people.
Yeah.
I don't think Bo Jackson thought about a lot of these things, there's sometimes like freaks of nature who are just whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, chances are you're not that person.
No, I
I just mean
definitely
any of us are
overthink.
not that person.
Yeah, I overthink, I overanalyze. That's just like it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But it's also kryptonite.
Yeah.
Especially in a game of failure, because then you're trying to figure out what's wrong every time you don't succeed. And when you're doing that, let's say you have a bad week and that's 20 straight at bats where you suck. It's like, oh gosh, now I'm thinking 20 different thoughts in one at bat or in one swing right now. And it's like, no, I got to turn
Yeah.
off all of that. I got to surrender all of that, because for one, it ain't going to help me. And 2, you wake up every day, your body's different than the day before.
Sure.
Let's say you've played 17 in a row, your legs are heavy. Like you have to figure out who you are that day, not, oh, well, I did this in spring training when my body felt unbelievable after 4 months off.
Right.
And I'm trying to do that in August when I've been grinding for 4 months. Like it's just not the same.
Well, what's interesting to me about baseball is just how many games. It's a game of failure, not just because you have 4 or 5 at bats or whatever, but like it's a game of failure because it's the longest season of any of the sports. So like you're gonna lose a lot of games, like even in a good season. Just like the same 500 in basketball versus 500 in baseball. I mean, there's about twice as many games. So like you're gonna a 500 team in both sports, one's gonna lose twice as many. Football, you're only playing 17 games. So like a great season, you might only lose like 2 games, right? I was thinking, I was thinking about this. How many games? I was gonna think, how many games did Lou Gehrig lose?
Ooh. That Yankees team in the 30s was unbelievable. Stupid.
This is why AI is not actually. Lou Gehrig retired from baseball in 1939, so there's no information on how many games he lost after that. Well,
he
yeah,
probably didn't lose
obviously.
Yeah, those Yankee teams, they probably won like 7 or 8 world titles. Probably
Yeah.
4 or 5 in a row.
But yeah, so you play 2,100 consecutive games. Okay, so if you're 500, they're obviously better than 500 because they're the Yankees then. But like that would be 1,000 games.
that you
A
lost.
lost. Can you imagine losing 1,000 baseball games? Like,
And out of those 1,000, he probably performed pretty well in
and a
those
lot
games.
of the ones that he lost, yeah,
Right.
of course.
But he still lost. So it's like dealing with the double emotions, right? Like,
Yeah.
because you invest in your career, but at the same time you want to win
Sure.
games.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to see sport. We know sports are team games, but like what a team game brings up, like in a movie, you could act the hell out of your role, and the star could suck, or the marketing department could drop the ball on the promotion of the film,
Right.
or the studio could not put any money behind it, and so one individual has only so much influence over the outcome. Basketball is probably the team sport where one individual really can probably has
Carry
the
the
most
team.
influence. Yeah,
Yeah.
one person can take over a game, but you even see that like that's a bad habit to pick up. Like Kobe Bryant won a lot of games and then also tanked a lot of games
Right.
because he couldn't really be on a team very well. But yeah, the acceptance and then just the statistical reality of like not more often than not, but often you're going to get a shit result. Can you handle that?
Right. Because baseball, we kind of say it, it's 9 individuals that you're trying to get to play together,
Yeah.
especially in a lineup. Like, it's 9 individuals. So if one guy doesn't do their job, next thing you know, the lineup can just get out of whack
Yeah.
because
Sure.
they're being able to pitch to a certain part of the lineup a certain way. Now you're
There's a hole that they can exploit.
right.
Yeah.
And then that hole gets exploited, the whole thing just falls apart.
Yes.
No matter how good the lineup
Yeah.
is on paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's very interesting to see how that's just navigated. And if you don't fix or come into the game and do your routines, etc., it's like on your bad day, the team could be going great. We could be up 8 runs, but you don't do your job. It's kind of what Big Bill
Yeah.
Belichick says all the time, right? Do your job. You don't do your job. We could end up losing that game
Yeah,
somehow.
Yeah, because like if there's not a credible threat of a run game in football, the quarterback's not going to be able to throw well because they're just going to blitz every time.
Right.
If the quarterback's not throwing well, then
They can
that
stack the
screws up the
box,
run
yeah.
game. Like if it's supposed to be this evenly balanced thing, or else the opponent knows this is where we direct all of our energy, and then even if it's only slightly out of balance, right? They know, hey, in the first quarter it's going to be fine, in the second quarter it's going to be fine, but the running back's going to get tired by the third or the fourth quarter because they're having to run over and over and over again because the quarterback's out of commission, right? And like, so it's just, and that's really what like great athletes do is they go, okay, this guy is statistically 10% worse when he goes left than right. So how do we make him him or her go left more often than right?
Right.
And over the course of however many minutes, that will lead to a 1.5 point statistical differential, and that's how we win the game. Like
it's all stats.
It boils down to just these little thing, and you're just running it over and over and over and over again, and then that creates just enough of a gap to
Right.
separate a win from a loss.
Yeah, I think you see that a lot in basketball.
Yes.
It's like the defense, they're just pounding the rock, and it might not
Yeah.
necessarily be working, but
Yeah.
eventually it'll break.
No, at the Spurs, they have this poster that's like the story of the teams
really?
that pound the rock thing.
That's cool.
Which is that like it's not one singular blow that opens up the thing. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of them.
Consistency of
Well, yeah, and
doing
like
the thing.
on a book, like it's not one word or one sentence or one page where someone's like, "That's why that book is good. That's why that sells." And I can't also go, the reason this worked was because on April 3rd, I crushed it. Like you can't even tell eventually by the time it comes out, all the days and time and hours and work has been blurred together because you did stuff and then you undid it and redid it and edited it and moved it and changed it. So there's the distinctions between all the different inputs get blended together into this finished product, to the point where, like, when I sit in this room and record an audiobook, some of it I'm like, where did I write this? Where did, like, you don't even recognize passages because it's the cumulative result of this process that's kind of not even you at any point. And yeah, that's what, to me, that pounding the rock thing is the idea. It's like you show up every day, you do it a lot. There might be some pivotal moment where it feels like it was this blow that did it, but that blow by itself would not have had any significance were it not for 20 years prior to that.
Right. That's what's so fascinating just about sports in general, or really anything in life. It's like the more consistent you are at doing something, the more you're pushing the needle.
Yeah.
To, for me, what I say is like being the person you want to be, or being the player you want to be. And I think with that comes like investing in others, especially in the game of individuals, like investing in my teammates. For one, it helps take the ego part out of it because you have to release that and think about other people.
Yeah.
You're not so wound up in your own struggles or performance. And as the book talks about, like good or bad, because it's so easy to focus on just good, or when you're going bad, so easy to focus on bad. And I think it was Don Mattingly, played first base for the Yankees. His quote was like, anytime I struggled, I would invest in other people. And then it was able to clear my conscience because I was trying to help them do their thing, that I forgot that I was even.
Well, you're
in this
by
one
definition
place.
getting out of your head and off your problems because you're focusing on someone else.
Right.
Yeah, like in basketball, if your shots aren't falling, you can just play really good defense. You know.
Yeah.
Baseball, you're a little more passive because like
Definitely.
you can't like will the ball to come to you, and
Right.
where in basketball you can chase it down, right? You can go get rebounds or block shots or whatever. But yeah, the idea of like when you're kind of stuck in your own shit to focus on someone else. This is why, like in sobriety, they talk a lot about being of service, because the more you're just ruminating on your own life and how stuck you are, it becomes a real wicked cycle. But if you're just like, oh, I'm going to help other people, I'm going to go to you realize other people have it worse than you. You also realize that if they're not too far gone, if there's something they can do, if their problems are solvable or fixable, or they can make progress, well, then like the same is true for you also.
Yeah.
If you watch someone who's in a slump get out of a slump because you helped them, of course you could get yourself out of a slump too.
Right.
It's not.
Yeah, it's all perspective, right? At
Yeah.
the end of the day, it's all how you perceive things, and you can control that.
Yeah.
I think in one of your podcasts, I wrote it down in my notes. When I listen to your podcast, I'll take I'll be driving in the car. That's mainly when I do it. So I'll throw a sentence down in my notes, and then I'll go back to it and be like, oh, which podcast was that? So I could try to go back and
Yeah.
figure it out. But one of them was like the discipline of perception, because your perception is something you control,
Yes.
especially on all events. So that's why I like reading this book, The Inner Game of Tennis. I know I keep going back to it.
No, that's
It's
why I
just-
gave it to you.
Yeah, it's fresh in my mind because I
Yeah.
was reading it yesterday sitting at the airport. But it's like you have the discipline to control everything you think.
Yeah.
And how you respond to it. And I think that's what you talk about with Marcus a lot, is like he has the ability to respond to everything.
Well, that's what he's doing. I mean, what Marcus is doing in meditation. This isn't like him. What I make up is this isn't him being like, here, let me just tell, because he's writing to himself. So
Right.
Marcus isn't going like, here are some general observations about the world that I find to be true. It wasn't a book of philosophical truths. It was more a person working against his assumptions or his issues and trying to sift through them to get to the truth. So when he's saying, at the end of book 5, this is one of my favorite passages. He says, I was once a fortunate man, but at some point fortune abandoned me. But true good fortune is what you make for yourself. Good fortune, he says, is good character, good intentions, and good actions. I think he was first thinking the first part. And then he was like, okay, but what if you thought about it this way? Right? Like, this isn't an abstract thing. He is he's like, why is my life so shit right now? What is all this stuff that's happening? And then he goes, wait, actually, I'm not unfortunate. I have the ability to make my own luck by choosing to be good and to think good thoughts and to do good things. And so he doesn't just magically have the right perspective. It's in the journal he is working to get to the right perspective. And not once, but over and over and over again in different situations when his natural instinct is to not be at that philosophical truth.
It's so powerful, right? Like I say I'm very immature in this process. Like I just started journaling.
So is he, and so am I.
And like have just started journaling, and it's like when I'm writing, it's like, am I writing in case somebody picks this up?
Yeah.
Like, am I trying to be impressive?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't need to.
Yeah.
But then you're writing, and for me, my mind goes all over the dang place. But like it's like his perspective shifted in that moment, and he was reminding himself, no, this is how you should view it. And then for me too, it's like there is no finish line with any of this, because new situations are going to pop up, new things are going to pop up. It could be 50 years from now, and I haven't been tested with this trial or tribulation since I was 20 or whatever. And it's like finding and understanding that, which is why meditations is so cool, because he's truly just going through life.
And you're only there for maybe a moment, and then it helps you, and then you got to come back to it. Like I just had this thing happen where someone was like, it's just a real asshole. Like it didn't harm me so much, it harmed this other person. And so I was watching this, and my wife was like, you would have been like so upset about this, like not that long ago. She's like, she was like, you should take this as a sign of progress that you didn't blow this whole thing up. And I was proud in that moment, but then as time has passed, the more I've thought about it, I'm not like where I would have been originally, but I'm bothered by it more than I let on in that moment. And so it's like, okay, I got to where I needed to go. And actually while I was at the airport, like afterwards, I sort of wrote a couple of daily Stoic emails. Like, so I think sometimes people think I'm like writing the stuff like from some place of expertise. I'm writing because I'm working my way through. I am angry about this. I want to hold this person accountable, but I need to remember, these are the things I need to remember. So the byproduct, the output of that is like the emails. But now I'm like, okay, the first wave of it passed and I got through that. But now there's like the second and the third waves where, now emails are going back and forth, and I'm like, I'm finding myself getting worked up about it again. And I'm like, okay, I have to remember those things, and then here's some other things. And I know it intellectually, but then actually feeling it in the moment and not letting it become a distraction, not letting it blow up a relationship with this person, not letting it spiral into this multi-person back and forth thing, and not letting it be anything more than it was, which is like a person did a shitty thing that had a consequence for a person that I wish hadn't happened, but it did happen. And that's about all the emotion I can have about it, because no amount of getting upset is going to make it unhappen. And then I also understand at some level, so I've known this person for a very long time, this is who they are, right, and they're not changing. And, not in anytime soon. And so I don't also have the ability to like use this to get through it. It just, it is what it is.
Right.
And then the sort of working through that, not just once, but often enough until everything settles back down and it recedes into the past, and then some other shit happens.
Right.
That's the process.
It's crazy because there's the theory.
Yeah.
There's, like you said, there's the theory of it, but then the action part of it is the hardest part.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely times where you're like, oh, it shouldn't be this way, or I'm the only one that has to deal with this. And it's like, no, so many people are going through the same stuff, maybe in just different circumstances.
Yes.
But it's kind of the same thing. So it's cool to hear you say, like, the emails, it's like stuff that I'm reminding myself of, or stuff I'm going through, and this is helping me get through it. But it's also, there could be 10,000 people going through the exact same thing.
Totally.
And it just like, everyone's like, oh, and it's like just like a little reminder, just like how Marcus did it there. It's like a little reminder to myself, oh no, perspective shift.
Yes.
Or, you know, whatever it is in that moment.
Yeah. I feel very like what Daily Stoic is a way for me to sort of publicly, or is a way for me to work through shit that's going in my own life, for which the byproduct is like professional output. But I'm doing it as much as I'm talking about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I'm sure you experience that too when you do, like, there's something about like what makes, oftentimes the people that are very good at things or very elite at something, it tends to come with a deficiency in other areas, and they can be complicated to deal with.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because it's almost like they're so good at this, that has taken precedent in their life, right? And they just don't have the awareness to, that's when people say they're well-rounded. It's like, no, you probably do something really well and it just outweighs the other stuff, and you're not aware enough to actually understand.
Yeah.
That
if you were well-rounded, you wouldn't be a professional baseball player.
At all.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Yeah.
Like, I had to be good at something or better at something than somebody else.
Yes.
To get into that position at some point along the road.
Yeah. And like maybe you see it physically manifest, like you're like, oh, this person's way taller than a normal person,
Right.
or this person's jacked more than a regular person. That's the physical manifestation of it. But also you think of the utter disproportionate focus on a seemingly trivial thing to be able to master it. That came at the neglect of a bunch of other stuff, almost always. Now, you can round that out later once you get comfortable and secure, somewhat secure in the profession. You can be like, oh, hey, actually, I can't afford to be so selfish or so myopically focused, because it creates an imbalance that actually affects the performance.
Right.
But the other problem is sometimes people are so good at it that other people start to compensate for those deficiencies for them. And then you get more and more unbalanced and less aware of how unbalanced you are, because you just take it for granted that like there's a quote from Kissinger where he says, early on in your career, you're worried about boring people. And then as you become successful and important and powerful, they worry about boring you. Right. And so there's just like an inherent entitlement that comes from like people going, hey, am I boring you? Like instead of you feeling like you have to carry, and is something as simple as conversations at a dinner party or whatever, instead of feeling like you have to carry your weight, people are like concerned that they're not doing enough for you. And that fucks with you, you know?
Especially like sometimes to be able to find that contentment in the game or where you're at, your career could be over. And you didn't even find that contentment.
Yeah.
So that's the mental, I think the mental battle of this game is finding that contentment mentally.
Yeah.
Physically, you might have to do a couple different things to get where you want to be. But mentally, finding that contentment to where like, no, just be me.
Yeah.
That's what got me here in the first place. Don't try to be somebody I'm not.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to go up there and be Aaron Judge and his 63 homers. That would be awesome. If it happened next year, that would just be insane.
Yeah.
But if I go and try to do that, circling back to what we talked at the beginning, if I go and try, it'll probably be worse.
Yeah.
If I go and try to force things to happen a certain way, or I start trying to make things happen, it's not going to happen.
What is interesting that even at that level, in the way that how many people who had the exact same childhood as you, exact same talents, exact same drive at you, at some point had to go, it's just not going to happen for me. Like, because they were 1% short here, or didn't get this break here, or had this injury here, and they had to just accept like, hey, I'm not gonna make it, or this is the ceiling for me. That everyone has to make that level of acceptance at some point in what they do. Someone has to go, hey, I'm not Aaron Judge, even though millions of people would trade places with that person
immediately.
Yes, and even talking, like, I've interviewed a bunch of different billionaires over the years, that they're like, no, I'm number 80 on the list of the richest people, you know, like, and that like, because I'm in real estate as opposed to tech, like it doesn't matter how good I am, the multiples of my kind of business, I'm never going to get to that level. I remember I was talking to a football coach and he was like, I would open it, the sports issue every year and be like, if I'm not like the highest paid coach, then like somebody fucked up, and you're just like, he's like, at some point I had to accept like, no, like I'm getting paid millions of dollars to do this thing. That's great. I should just be happy with that. But the problem is very few people get to an elite level practicing any form of acceptance. And inevitably we all do have to practice the acceptance. And that's like a muscle you don't have.
It's so hard because your whole life you're dreaming and aspiring to be X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
But at some point it's just like, no, I'm really good because I do these things well. So on a daily basis, do these things well.
Yeah.
Don't try and do too much. And that's where you go back to the flow. If you're able to turn your brain off or turn self one off, you'll probably outperform what you think you can.
Yeah.
Because you're not so wrapped up in, oh, I got to hit 300 or I got to hit 40 home runs, or you just let it be.
Well, we can see it clearly in sports. And if people can see this analogy, it might help them. It's like, okay, centers get paid about X in football, right? Left tackles get paid a band here. Running backs get this. And they know this well enough that like this is what a franchise tag is, right? That's where they go like, hey, you're going to get, this is the band of salaries for you. So because you couldn't come to an agreement with your team, this is what we're going to pay you. I imagine this is what they do in arbitration in baseball. Yep. It's like you think you're this super special, unique individual who's worth an unlimited amount, right. But actually statistically there is a number that you're worth, right? Correct. And there's games within games that you're playing, right? Oh, yeah. Just like the average, your career length is going to be this on the inside, the outside. And I've had to accept that like as an author, it's like, okay, I can't compare, like I have friends, like I think you left with Atomic Habits last time, right? It's like, okay, so he wrote a book about habits, which sold 20 million copies. And I know James and I were at a conference where he was thinking about not doing a traditionally published book. And I was like, no, you should definitely and in that conversation, I was the established successful author had written multiple books, had bestsellers. And I'm like, no, I think you should try it. It might work out. And then he sells on one book, like more than at least twice as many as all of my books combined have sold. But I remember I was talking to someone and he was like, yeah, that's the biggest category. Habits is the biggest category that you could possibly have a hit in. And so you have to accept that you're playing a different game, that everything has its own band, mm-hmm. right? And if you're like, well, has more than me, so he's better than me, and all of a sudden the thing that you were proud of 2 seconds ago, you're miserable about. And so realizing, you have this band, this kind of narrow band. And in fact, the band is so narrow that it's like you and your unique talents and unique circumstances, and you can only measure yourself against yourself. But just the acceptance of, hey, like you felt called to perform classical music. You can't wonder why you're not selling out stadiums. Like that's not a thing. Like there's not 70,000 people in every city who want to go listen to the fucking cello.
Right.
Like, and the sooner you accept that, the more excited you can be, and the more surreal it'll feel that there's 1,000 people in this beautiful old theater listening to you play the cello, and you're getting paid an obscene amount considering, and you should be happy with that.
Right.
And the sooner you can kind of go like, oh yeah, given what I brought here and what I do, this is amazing. The sooner you can get there, the better you'll feel.
Yeah. I mean, that's all crazy. It's going back to you talking about the billionaires, like being stuck. Yeah. Like, oh, I'm number 80. You see that in baseball too.
Of course.
You're like, oh, that's where your ego takes over. You're like, oh, I'm better than him, but he's perceived to be higher on this thing than me. And it's like, you control 0% of what goes into this list.
Yeah.
Your stats could be better. You could be XYZ, but they view him better. You can't control.
It's because
that.
he's from Pittsburgh, and so Pittsburgh's going to overpay him,
Right.
and it's because he went to this college in this run in their thing, so it was a media thing. So then he has bigger There's all these things that have nothing to. You can't just will that into existence, and you have to accept that you got all these things, and then it's all like what you're like the hilarity of being on the Forbes list or being in the league and being comparing yourself to what another player has and being jealous is like, meanwhile, every game there's tens of thousands of people in the stands who would kill for one pitch as a professional baseball player,
right?
Or who would kill just to have gone to high school with you.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like just to have the connection of like, I know that person and he signed a jersey for me, but you're too busy looking at what you don't have. Like Seneca talks about how there's the poverty of having too little, but most poverty is like wanting more. It's wanting more than you have. And thus you make yourself feel poor instead of incredibly fortunate.
Yeah. It's so powerful because you can be in any situation. That's the power of perspective, right?
Yeah.
Being able to take yourself away. And I know we do a good job, like it's just as the Rangers, like trying to give back to the community and seeing that. Like I had a charity event at the beginning of January for the Miracle League, which is kids that don't have the opportunity to play baseball at all. But it's like just doing that one event, it puts everything back into perspective.
Yeah.
That like I'm here and I'm able to do this. This is the 1% of the 1% of baseball players. Like, go enjoy what you do.
Yeah.
Comparison is the death, I think, of athletes because, for one, you're never going to be in the other person's situation. And I always say, like, comparing swings, right? Like, Aaron Judge is 6'7", 280, just chiseled out of his mind. Like, I'm 6'2", 215. That doesn't compare.
Yeah.
His environment, he's in New York. Like, I'm in Texas. Like, there's so many different variables. I love watching Mike Trout hit, but it's like, my body's not Mike Trout's body. Comparison is terrible.
Well, it's not the shitty thing with comparison and envy is it thinks it can pick and choose. It's like, oh, you want to be him? Okay. Also, you're adopted,
Right.
You know, or also you have some. Who knows? In 13 years, he could find out that he has a congenital heart defect or whatever, right? Or you can't you don't get to pick the things that you want and feel insecure about. You'd have to trade for the whole package, and almost certainly you wouldn't trade for the whole package. Not that it sucks to be him, that he didn't get amazingly lucky in a bunch of wonderful ways that he's very fortunate in. But it's you don't get to say, well, I get all the things that I have, and I get to say, but I also want these 5 other things, and I've been screwed over because I don't get them. That's not how it works.
Right.
You got to make a whole trade, and in that case, you probably wouldn't.
Right. It's like too, like for me, I believe in baseball, people get opportunities. Some will get more opportunities than others, but if you're so wrapped up comparing yourself to other people, you might miss the door that was open for you.
Sure.
Because you're so worried about kind of what other people are doing. And I'm sure that in all walks of life, that can be said to be true. You just kind of notice it in baseball because that's my career, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, why do you compare yourself when that really doesn't matter at all? But it's almost innate. Like, it just happens.
Well, you can see why it's good from an evolutionary standpoint to never be satisfied, to always want more.
Yeah.
Look, if Elon Musk was easily satisfied, he would have stopped when he made, $20 million on his first company, and then he would have stopped when he made $200 million on the second company. And that would have made it impossible to start Tesla and SpaceX. And that would have been bad for humanity. That's also why he can't stop now.
Right.
And look, I think on a sort of historical basis, we know inevitably that insatiability leads to ruin, that you overreach. And so there's like some real reason to stop. But I think just on a general level, just knowing like, hey, the force makes sense. That's a good thing. That's propelled the human species forward. But it's probably on a net basis shitty for the individual who can never be like, oh, that was a good run. I got 8 years in
Right.
professional, especially like what it does is it obscures what you thought was on the far end of the possibilities at the beginning. Like I remember going, if I could write one book, that would be that. I mean, that's what a writer gets to do one time. And that's what makes you the thing. And then it was like immediately you sign the book deal and you're like, well, now I hope it's a huge, I hope it's, the number has to be high. And then the sales have to be high. And then, well, can I follow it up? And then can I follow, and then eventually it becomes, can I do it forever? Or can I do it the most? And so your inability to go like, I am playing with house money and I'm way ahead of the curve and it's all gravy from here, that's what deprives you of the ability to enjoy the thing while you're doing it.
Yeah, I think that's what, if you're able to get to that place where you're able to surrender all of that, that's when you're legit playing free.
Yeah.
And that's where self one won't get in the way.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, when you put expectations on things, or you say, one thing I took away, I took so much stuff away from you and McConaughey's talk. It was unbelievable, but it was like, if you try to do better,
Yeah.
then you're not focusing on the moment
Yeah.
right now. Like,
Yeah.
if I go 3 for 3 with 3 home runs, like, the next day, I can't outdo that. That was like picture perfect.
Yeah.
I can't outperform that. And then like season to season, it's like, okay, I had a great rookie year. It's like, oh, I got to outdo that. No, just be you.
Yeah.
And perform your game, play your game. When you try to outdo things and you put those expectations, you're probably going to fall when it comes to like setting the standard kind of too high. But that's where I kind of talk about having unrealistic expectations,
Yeah.
but realistic review of like what you're doing. Like, I got to shoot for the stars, but at the end of the day, when I sit down, it's like, okay, this is what I'm trying to,
Yeah.
do. Did I achieve that or not?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I'll do it tomorrow.
I think it's probably most of it probably traces back to childhood. Like what makes you, if you have a parent whose approval and affection is dependent on how you perform, that's a very hard thing to unlearn. And I think a lot of people that become like early on, that's adaptive because the other kids are like, yeah, baseball is fun, but also my Game Boy is fun. So like it's a toss up for me. But if you become the kid where you're like, no, I want to do this so my dad notices me, or I want to do this because when I'm on the field, it's the only part of my life that doesn't suck because
Right.
I come from a shitty place. That feeling is going to be a competitive edge when you're playing against regular kids that are just like, oh, it's nice to be outside,
Right.
And so, and then when you're locked in competition with two people who both want to be baseball players, but for one, they've transformed it into a matter of life and death, and the other's like, well, if I don't do this, like business is cool too, that person's going to win. The problem is that mindset is very hard to turn off.
Right.
And it feasts on itself.
Right. And as a leader, figuring out what makes your teammates click will help the team go forward.
Sure.
Because if, like you said, someone comes from, let's say, a worse background than me, and I know that, like there's some sympathy with that, but also like what makes them tick.
Yeah.
So kind of like when to push and when to pull back.
Right.
And other guys, same thing. Like everyone goes out there and plays for something.
Yeah.
Or at least they should be playing for something. But finding out what that something is helps you as a leader be able to inspire them, especially in the times of struggle.
Yeah.
I think that is what makes a true leader, especially in a baseball clubhouse. Knowing the other 30 guys that are in there and what makes them tick and being able to get their full potential out of them, especially when it means the most, right? Which is when we're competing.
Yeah. And then knowing, oh, hey, this is what I'm motivated by. And some of that's healthy and I want to keep that. And
Right.
then here's the part of it that's not healthy that I got to sort of cut out and replace with something that's a little bit more sustainable or a little less corrosive, like a less corrosive form of fuel. Because like anger is usually bad fuel. Proving people wrong is usually bad fuel. Like getting your self-worth from accomplishments usually bad fuel. Like how do you kind of replace that with slightly more sustainable forms of energy?
Yeah, and I mean those things can be temporary.
Yeah.
Like temporarily it could help you be successful.
Yeah.
But in the long term it's going to be
It'll
detrimental
eat you up.
to your performance because you're always playing with that chip.
Yeah.
And it's like at some point that chip is going to weigh you down.
Well, yeah, I think you see this in like the guys that are like about anger or, you know, like it becomes later in their career, they're just like manufacturing shit to be angry about, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, it seems like a miserable way to do it.
It's like they're only happy if they're complaining about something.
Yeah.
Something like that. And everyone has their edge and that's great. But like you said, there are some negative things that could be temporarily good.
Yeah.
But if that's what you focus on all the time, like you could just create separations between people.
Yeah.
Which could divide a clubhouse essentially.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, now what? When you're winning, we say in baseball, winning cures everything.
Yeah.
Like you don't realize the crap that's going on in
Sure.
the clubhouse. But as soon as you start losing and everything comes to light kind of all at once, you're like, oh gosh, we got some stuff to work on.
Yeah.
But it's like if we don't correct that stuff or if we don't acknowledge that stuff early, it could be very detrimental just to the club in general.
Yeah.
Which is it's so fascinating navigating a clubhouse.
Yeah.
For one, like I'm probably one of the fifth youngest guys, right? So like seeing all of these very successful ball players in baseball, you try to get to 10 years of service time. Like that's the pinnacle. That's like max pension. That's what everyone tries to get to. So seeing all of these guys, I think we had like 5 or 6 guys last year, which is incredible. But seeing all these guys at that place where it's like, that's where I want to get to eventually.
Yeah.
What makes them successful, seeing all of that. See, this is where my brain just goes crazy. It's like, does watching them help me get there, or does seeing how they do things and me kind of creating my own path, is that going to help me even more?
Yeah. Baseball, seems like it has a big age range of players, unlike some sports, because you can. It's not that it's not physically taxing as it is, but you can play it long. I think you can play
Not
it
like
longer.
football.
Yes, exactly. It's not like chewing you up
Right.
the same way that some, like maybe the more contact sports are.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, your body. I mean, the travel. I would say the travels are just a little worse because you are flying every couple of days.
Yeah.
And you're changing time zones and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, from a physical perspective, those guys in football, they beat each other up.
Yeah.
I know our turf fields can kind of get to you a little bit more so.
Yeah.
Because at basketball, running on the hardwood can't be good for your body, especially how big those guys are.
Sure.
But I'd say that's where the length of our schedule kind of comes into play.
Right.
Because like I said, like in spring training, you're going to feel phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then in August, you're like, oh my gosh, I've been hit by a bus. How do I get my body ready today?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting dynamic to see how guys have navigated it. And was it successful? Was it not successful? Have they had to change what they did? It's so interesting. And it's always interesting, too, because when someone reaches their 10 years, like we have like a little party, essentially, and they always ask them the $1 million question. What do you know now you wish you knew then?
Yeah.
And it's just funny to hear
What
their answers.
What do people tend to say the most?
To enjoy it, to have a lot of fun. And it's like the cliche, like, okay, I'm getting out of here quick type of answer. But it's like truly, especially with me, if I went back 10 years from now and told myself, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll get to the same spot as if you continue to believe that you have to take 1,000 swings or whatever.
Yeah.
And like that was my edge at that point. But as we continually grow and learn and adapt, and there might be days where I need 1,000 swings, but it is interesting to see how every single person is just so vastly different. Or they say the same thing in their own way, and it seems different, but it's actually the same. So it's crazy to see guys and their thought processes and understand that, like, we're all essentially trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Some guys are motivated by more stuff like we talked about, whether it's anger, whether it's I want to be, in the Hall of Fame or just something.
Right.
They're all motivated by something. Finding that motivation helps you be a better leader. But then hearing them say it in their own definition of what success is that's what's truly crazy about the whole journey and trying to understand people and their thought processes. Because as I'm going through this journey and like understanding my own process, it's like, holy cow, bro, turn your brain off. But other guys, it's just fascinating how they've gotten to that point doing the things they do.
Yeah, every athlete I've talked to has said some version of like, because you get there because you're competitive, you're driven, you sweat every fucking thing, but then later they're like, I wish I'd enjoyed it more. And
Right.
I've tried to be like, yeah, it shouldn't be miserable while I'm doing it. It should be
Right.
hard because
Definitely.
it's hard and it's tough to do, and probably not doing it will hopefully at some point be a relief, like, but while I'm doing it, it shouldn't suck, because then the only reason I'm doing it is to get some kind of reward on the other side, or I'm only doing it, in for some endpoint, in which case, what is is it financial security? Okay, well, I'm already there, so why am I still doing it? Or like,
Right.
the logic doesn't. There's almost no logic in which, unless you're trying to pay off somebody's medical bills, you should continue doing it, even though you fucking hate it
Right.
every day and it's torture.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the right way to do it.
At all.
Yeah.
Because that's the miserable, we call him salty vet, right?
Yeah.
It's like, dude,
Yeah.
you don't have to be here.
Yeah.
You get to be here.
Yeah.
And you get the opportunity to
And
do
someday
this.
you will be sad that you are not here.
Right.
So why are you making it shitty now?
Yeah. And that's what's hard too, right? Like when you're sucking, embracing that suck and still finding a joy through the suck.
Yeah, because that thing that's like, show me a good loser and I'll show you a loser. If you like losing, there, like, it shouldn't be fun to lose, and you shouldn't be like, win or lose, I'm good with either. That's probably a sign it's time for you to go, or you don't have
Hang 'em up.
any competitive drive. Yeah, but can it not wreck you when it doesn't work out?
Right.
That's where you're trying to get, I think.
1000%. Can you turn the page, learn from the mistakes,
Yeah.
and then wake up the next day and be like, okay, I'm going to go kick your ass.
Yes.
And if I don't, I'm not going to get hung up on it. I'm just going to come back tomorrow and try to kick your ass again.
That's awesome.
Basically.
You want to go in the bookstore?
Yeah, let's do it.